The wind howled like a wounded beast across the frozen expanse of Jotunheim, its icy breath carving jagged ridges into the mountains that loomed over the land. Snow swirled in chaotic patterns, as if the very air were alive with mischief. Somewhere in this desolate realm, Loki Laufeyson, the trickster god, wandered alone. His emerald-green eyes glinted with a mix of boredom and restlessness as he trudged through the snow. The Aesir had grown predictable, their halls of Asgard too orderly, too dull. Loki craved something more, something that would remind the gods why they once feared his cunning. Meanwhile, far from the icy grip of Jotunheim, in the shadowy depths of the Egyptian Duat, Set brooded. The air here was thick with the scent of decay and the whispers of lost souls. Set's crimson eyes burned like embers in the darkness as he paced the barren expanse of his exile. Once a god of storms and strength, he had been cast aside by his own kin, branded a traitor for his role in Osiris's demise. But Set was no fool. He knew the Egyptian pantheon's judgment was born of fear, not justice. And fear, he thought with a sly grin, could be exploited. Loki's journey through Jotunheim was aimless at first, a meandering path through frostbitten valleys and towering glaciers. But then something called to him, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonated deep within his bones. It was as if the land itself were whispering secrets only he could hear. Following the sound, Loki ventured into a cavern hidden beneath a glacier. The walls glistened with veins of ancient ice, and the air grew colder with every step. At the heart of the cavern, he found it, the asterisk shard of eternity asterisk. It was a jagged fragment of obsidian, no larger than his palm, but it pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy. When Loki reached out to touch it, the shard seemed to react its surface rippling like liquid shadow. Images flashed before his eyes, realms beyond counting, gods and mortals locked in endless struggle, and a vast, formless void that seemed to watch it all with cold indifference. "Well, well," Loki murmured, a sly smile spreading across his face. "What have we here?" In the Duat, Set's brooding was interrupted by a vision. It came unbidden, a flood of images that seared themselves into his mind. He saw a shard of darkness, a tool of unimaginable power, and a trickster with eyes like emeralds. The vision was cryptic, but its meaning was clear. The shard was the key to his revenge. Set's lips curled into a feral grin. He had spent centuries plotting his return to power, but now the path forward was clear. He would find this shard, and with it, he would tear down the pantheon that had cast him out. Loki, ever the opportunist, knew the shard was no ordinary artifact. Its power was too great, its origins too mysterious. He needed answers, and there was only one place to find them, the asterisk crossroads of Myth Asterisk. The crossroads was a place outside time and space where the boundaries between mythologies blurred. It was a realm of endless possibilities, where gods from different pantheons could meet, trade secrets, or wage war. Loki had been there before, though never for long. The crossroads was as dangerous as it was alluring, a place where even a trickster could be outmaneuvered. With the shard safely tucked away, Loki opened a portal to the crossroads. The air shimmered like a mirage, and he stepped through, leaving the frozen wastes of Jotunheim behind. Set arrived at the crossroads shortly after Loki. The realm was a surreal landscape of shifting colors and impossible geometries. Rivers of light flowed through the air, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to ripple like water. Set's crimson eyes scanned the horizon until they landed on Loki, who was leaning casually against a tree that seemed to grow upside down. "You're late," Loki said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Set smirked. "I didn't realize we were on a schedule." The two gods regarded each other warily, each sizing up the other. Loki saw a kindred spirit in Set, a fellow outcast, a master of chaos. Set, in turn, recognized Loki's cunning and knew that any alliance between them would be fraught with danger. But danger, they both knew, was where opportunity lay. "I assume you've seen it too," Loki said, holding up the shard. Its dark surface seemed to drink in the light around it. Set's eyes gleamed. "I have, and I know what it can do." "Then you know what's at stake," Loki replied. "This shard could unravel the very fabric of reality." Or he paused, his smile widening. "It could remake it," Set nodded slowly. "An alliance, then." For now, Loki agreed. Their pact was barely sealed when the crossroads began to tremble. The air grew heavy, and the light dimmed as if the realm itself were recoiling from their presence. From the shadows emerged two figures: Thor, the thunder god of Asgard, and Horus, the falcon-headed protector of Egypt. "Loki," Thor bellowed, his voice like rolling thunder. "You've gone too far this time." Horus's golden eyes narrowed as he leveled his spear at Set. "You dare meddle with forces beyond your understanding." Loki and Set exchanged a glance. This was no coincidence. The Shard had drawn their enemies to them. "Well," Loki said with a smirk, "this should be interesting." Set grinned, his crimson eyes blazing. "Let's show them what chaos can do." The crossroads of myth trembled under the weight of divine power as Loki and Set faced their adversaries. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, crackled with lightning, illuminating the surreal landscape with bursts of white light. Horus's spear gleamed like the sun, its golden tip aimed unerringly at Set. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm or a war. Loki's emerald eyes darted between Thor and Horus, calculating. He had no love for Thor, but the thunder god's presence here was no coincidence. The Shard had drawn them all together, and Loki couldn't shake the feeling that it was no accident. Set, standing beside Loki, flexed his fingers, his crimson eyes glowing with anticipation. "2 against 2, he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "I like those odds," Loki smirked. "Let's hope you're as good as you think you are." Thor was the first to move. With a roar, he hurled Mjolnir at Loki, the hammer streaking through the air like a comet. Loki dodged, his form blurring as he shifted into a wisp of smoke. The hammer struck the ground, sending shockwaves rippling through the crossroads. The realm itself seemed to groan in protest. Horus lunged at Set, his spear a blur of golden light. Set met him head-on, summoning a curved blade forged from shadows. The clash of their weapons sent sparks flying, each strike resonating with the power of their respective pantheons. Loki reappeared behind Thor, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still relying on brute force, brother." "How predictable," Thor spun, his eyes blazing. "You've gone too far this time, Loki." "That shard is dangerous, and you know it." "Dangerous?" Loki laughed, a sound as sharp as ice. "Or interesting. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Set and Horus were locked in a deadly dance. Horus's movements were precise, each strike calculated to exploit Set's weaknesses. But Set was no ordinary opponent. His attacks were wild, unpredictable, fueled by centuries of pent-up rage. "You think you can stop me, little falcon?" Set taunted, his blade clashing against Horus's spear. "I am chaos incarnate." "You cannot cage me." Horus's golden eyes narrowed. "Chaos without purpose is meaningless." "You've lost your way, Set." Set's grin widened. "Then let me show you the beauty of chaos." As the battle raged, the Shard of Eternity began to pulse with a dark, ominous light. The crossroads, already unstable, started to fracture. Rivers of light turned black, and the ground beneath their feet cracked, revealing a void that seemed to stretch into infinity. Loki felt the Shard's energy surge through him, a heady mix of power and corruption. It whispered to him, promising untold power, but at a cost. He could feel it tugging at his mind, urging him to unleash its full potential. Set, too, felt the Shard's influence. His attacks grew more frenzied, his movements less controlled. The Shard was feeding on his chaos, amplifying it. Thor noticed the change. "Loki, whatever you're doing, stop it. You're tearing this realm apart." Loki hesitated. For all his cunning, even he hadn't anticipated the Shard's sentience. It wasn't just a tool, it was alive, and it had its own agenda. The crossroads shuddered violently, a massive rift opening in the sky. From it poured tendrils of darkness, writhing like serpents. The realm was collapsing, and if they didn't act quickly, they would all be consumed. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. For all their mutual distrust, they knew they had no choice but to work together, for now. "We need to stabilize the realm," Loki said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. Set nodded. And quickly, Thor and Horus, realizing the gravity of the situation, reluctantly lowered their weapons. "This isn't over," Thor growled. "No," Loki agreed. "But if we don't act now, there won't be anything left to fight over." Loki proposed a plan. They would use the Shard's power to seal the rifts in the crossroads. It was a risky move. The Shard was unstable, and using it could have unforeseen consequences. but they had no other options. Set surprisingly agreed. Better to risk it than let this realm collapse. Thor and Horus, though wary, had no choice but to go along. The four gods formed a circle, each channeling their power into the shard. Loki and Set's chaotic energy mingled with Thor's lightning and Horus's radiant light. The shard pulsed violently, its dark surface cracking as it absorbed their combined power. For a moment it seemed to work. The rifts began to close, the darkness receding. But then the shard let out a deafening shriek, and a wave of energy exploded outward, knocking them all off their feet. When the dust settled, the crossroads were stable, but the shard was gone. In its place was a faint, shimmering light, a delicate balance of chaos and order. Loki stared at the light, his mind racing. The shard had been more than just a tool, it had been a test. And they had passed. Set too seemed to understand. It wanted to see if we could work together, he said, his voice tinged with awe. Thor and Horus exchanged uneasy glances. What does this mean? Horus asked. Loki smiled, though there was no mischief in it this time. It means we've been playing a game without knowing the rules. And now the game has changed. As the four gods stood amidst the stabilized crossroads, the shimmering light began to fade. But the shard's influence lingered, a reminder of the power they had wielded, and the cost. Loki and Set, though weakened, felt a newfound respect for each other. They had faced the shard's corruption and emerged stronger, if not unscathed. But the shard's disappearance left more questions than answers. Who or what had created it? And what did it want? As the gods prepared to part ways, Loki caught Set's eye. This isn't the end, he said. Set grinned. No, it's just the beginning. The crossroads of myth, now stabilized but forever changed, lay silent as the four gods stood amidst the fading light of the shard of eternity. The air was heavy with unspoken questions, the kind that linger long after the battle is over. Loki, ever the schemer, was the first to break the silence. Well, he said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeves, that was enlightening. Thor scowled, his grip tightening on Mjolnir. Enlightening. You nearly destroyed this realm, Loki. And for what? A game. Loki's smile was infuriatingly calm. A game. Perhaps. But isn't that what we're all playing, brother? Gods, mortals, we're all pieces on the board. The only difference is some of us know how to move. Set chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He's not wrong. The shard was a test and we passed. That's more than most can say. Horus, his golden eyes still narrowed in suspicion, stepped forward. A test by whom? Who created the shard? And why? Loki's gaze flicked to Set, a silent agreement passing between them. They didn't have the answers, not yet, but they both knew this was far from over. That, Loki said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is the real question, isn't it? The four gods parted ways, each returning to their respective realms. Thor and Horus carried warnings to their pantheons, urging vigilance in the wake of the shard's disappearance. But Loki and Set had other plans. As Loki stepped back into the frozen wastes of Jotunheim, he felt a strange sense of unease. The shard's influence lingered, a faint hum in the back of his mind. It was as if the artifact had left a piece of itself behind, a shadow of its power. Set, too, felt the shard's echo as he returned to the Duat. The whispers of lost souls seemed louder now, more insistent. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by the gods, but by something far older, far more powerful. Days passed, and the realms began to settle. But Loki and Set knew better than to think the danger had passed. The shard's disappearance was not an end, but a beginning. And if they were to uncover the truth, they would need to work together, properly this time. Loki found Set at the crossroads, the realm still bearing the scars of their battle. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a sense of anticipation. You felt it too, didn't you? Loki asked, his voice low. Set nodded. The shard's echo. It's still out there waiting. And so are we, Loki said, his emerald eyes gleaming. But we can't do this alone. Not this time. Set studied him for a moment, then grinned. An alliance, then. For real this time, Loki extended a hand. For real, Set clasped it, their pact sealed. Their search began in the crossroads, the one place where all mythologies intersected. If there were answers to be found, they would be here. As they wandered the surreal landscape, Loki and Set began to piece together the shard's origins. They found fragments of ancient texts, etched into stones that seemed to shift and change as they read. The text spoke of a primordial force, older than the gods themselves, that had created the shard as a test, a way to measure the balance between chaos and order. "A test," Loki murmured, running his fingers over the shifting runes. "But for what purpose?" Set's crimson eyes narrowed. "To see if we were worthy, perhaps. Or to prepare us for something greater." Loki glanced at him. "You think there's more to this?" Set nodded. "I do, and I think we're about to find out." As they delved deeper into the crossroads, Loki and Set were struck by a shared vision. It came without warning, a flood of images that left them breathless. They saw a vast, formless void darker than the deepest night. Within it, something stirred, an entity of unimaginable power, its presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The entity spoke, its voice echoing in their minds. "Asterisk, you have passed the first test, but the journey is far from over. The shard was but a fragment of my power. To prove yourselves worthy, you must seek the others." Asterisk, the vision faded, leaving Loki and Set shaken but determined. "Others," Loki said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are more shards." Set's grin was feral. "Then let's find them." Their first lead took them to the edge of the crossroads, where the boundaries between realms were thinnest. Here they found a portal, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. Beyond it lay a realm neither of them had seen before, a place of endless twilight, where the sky burned with the colors of a dying sun. "Where does it lead?" Set asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Loki studied the portal, his mind racing. "Somewhere new. Somewhere ancient." Without hesitation, they stepped through, the portal closing behind them. The realm they entered was unlike anything they had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of ash and decay, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and barren. In the distance, they could see the ruins of a massive structure, its spires reaching toward the burning sky. As they approached, they realized the structure was a temple, an ancient, crumbling edifice that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. "This is it," Loki said, his voice filled with awe. "The first shard is here." Set's grin widened. "Then let's claim it." But as they stepped into the temple, they were met with a challenge. Standing before them was a figure cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and changing with every step. "Who dares enter the Temple of Twilight?" the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the ruins. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. "We do," Loki said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "And we're not leaving without what we came for." The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. It was a guardian, a being of immense power tasked with protecting the shard. "To claim the shard," the guardian said, "you must prove your worth. Only those who understand the balance of chaos and order may pass." Loki smirked. "Challenge accepted." As Loki and Set faced the guardian, the temple began to tremble, the air thick with tension. The first shard was within their grasp, but the cost of claiming it would be high. And somewhere in the depths of the void, the ancient entity watched, its presence a reminder that this was only the beginning. The Temple of Twilight loomed before Loki and Set, its ancient spires casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The air was thick with the scent of ash and decay, and the faint, otherworldly light emanating from the temple pulsed like a heartbeat. The guardian, cloaked in shifting shadows, stood between them and the shard, its voice echoing through the ruins. "To claim the shard," the guardian intoned, "you must prove your worth. Only those who understand the balance of chaos and order may pass." Loki smirked, his emerald eyes gleaming with mischief. "Balance, you say? That's our specialty." Set's crimson eyes burned with determination. "Let's get this over with." The trial of balance, the guardian raised a hand, and the temple around them began to shift. The walls dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and shadow, and Loki and Set found themselves standing in a vast, empty void. Before them floated two doors, one made of pure light, the other of impenetrable darkness. "Choose wisely," the guardian's voice echoed. "One path leads to the shard, the other to oblivion." Loki and Set exchanged a glance. "This is a test," Loki said, his voice low. "It's not about the doors. It's about us, Set nodded. Chaos and order. We have to balance them, Loki grinned. Exactly. Together they stepped forward, each placing a hand on one of the doors. The moment they touched them, the doors began to merge, light and darkness intertwining until they formed a single shimmering portal. The Guardian's voice echoed again, softer this time. You have passed the trial. The shard is yours. Beyond the portal lay a chamber bathed in twilight. At its center, suspended in midair, was the second shard of eternity. It pulsed with the same dark, otherworldly energy as the first, but this one seemed different. Its surface shimmered with faint, golden veins, as if it were alive. Loki reached out to touch it, but Set grabbed his wrist. Careful, Set warned. This one feels sentient. Loki hesitated, then nodded. You're right. It's watching us. As they approached the shard, it began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through their very souls. Images flashed before their eyes, visions of a vast, formless void and the entity that dwelled within it. You have done well, the entity's voice echoed in their minds. But the journey is not yet complete. To prove your worth, you must unite the shards and restore the balance of creation. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. Unite the shards? Loki asked. How many are there? 3, the entity replied. The third lies beyond the Twilight Realm, in a place where time and space converge. Seek it, and you will find the answers you seek. The portal to the Twilight Realm closed behind them as Loki and Set stepped into the crossroads of myth. The realm was eerily quiet, the usual hum of divine energy replaced by an unsettling stillness. Where do we go now? Set asked, his crimson eyes scanning the horizon. Loki frowned, his mind racing. The entity said the third shard lies where time and space converge. That can only mean one place, the nexus of eternity. Set raised an eyebrow. The nexus? That's just a myth. So were the shards, Loki replied with a smirk. Until they weren't. Together they opened a portal to the nexus, a place so ancient and powerful that even the gods feared to tread. The air crackled with energy as they stepped through, the ground beneath their feet shifting like liquid. The nexus was a realm of impossible geometries, where time and space folded in on themselves. The sky above was a swirling vortex of colors, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple like water. In the distance, they could see the third shard, its dark surface pulsing with an otherworldly light. But standing between them and the shard was a figure cloaked in shadow, a being of immense power, its form shifting and changing with every step. Who dares enter the nexus? The figure intoned, its voice echoing through the realm. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. We do, Loki said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. And we're not leaving without what we came for. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. It was the same entity they had seen in their visions, its presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. You have come far, the entity said, its voice resonating in their minds. But the final trial is the most difficult. To claim the shard, you must prove that chaos and order can coexist. The entity raised a hand, and the nexus around them began to shift. The swirling vortex above them split into two, one of pure light, the other of impenetrable darkness. Choose, the entity commanded. Chaos or order. Only one may claim the shard. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. This is it, Loki said, his voice low. The final test, Set nodded. We have to choose. But how? Loki grinned. We don't choose. We balance. Together they stepped forward, each placing a hand on one of the vortexes. The moment they touched them, the vortexes began to merge, light and darkness intertwining until they formed a single shimmering portal. The entity's voice echoed again, softer this time. You have passed the final trial. The shard is yours. As Loki and Set claimed the third shard, the nexus began to tremble. The air grew heavy, and the ground beneath their feet cracked, revealing a vast, formless void. From the void emerged the entity, its presence filling the realm with a sense of awe and terror. You have proven yourselves worthy, the entity said, its voice resonating in their minds. The shards were a test, a way to measure the balance of chaos and order. By uniting them, you have restored the balance of creation. Loki and Set exchanged a glance. What now? Set asked. The entity's form shifted, its presence becoming less intimidating. Now you must decide. Will you use the shards to reshape the realms, or will you let them fade, their power absorbed into the fabric of existence? Loki and Set exchanged a knowing glance. We choose balance, Loki said, his voice firm. Set nodded. Chaos and order together. The entity's form shimmered, its presence fading. Then let it be so. The resolution as the shards dissolved, their power merging with the fabric of existence, Loki and Set felt a sense of peace. The realms stabilized, the rifts between gods and mortals healed. Thor and Horus, watching from afar, nodded in silent approval. Loki and Set stood together at the crossroads of myth, the realm now bathed in a soft, golden light. Well, Loki said, his tone light but his eyes serious. That was something, Set chuckled. Indeed. But what now? Loki grinned. Now we explore. There's a whole multiverse out there, and I, for one, am curious. Set nodded. Agreed. But don't think this means I trust you, Loki laughed. Wouldn't have it any other way. The concluding thought as they parted ways, the words of the entity echoed in their minds. In the dance of creation, chaos is not the enemy of order but its partner. Only together can they weave the tapestry of existence. And so the story of Loki and Set came to an end, but their journey was far from over.